All right. Well, I'm here at Show and Tell at the Lambton Heritage Museum this afternoon, and I've been joined by Kathy Hill, who brought in a really amazing portrait that's actually related to one of our displays in the Lambton Gallery here at the museum. So I was really excited to see this Show and Tell option come in today, and hoping that Kathy can share a little bit with us about the man in the portrait in front of us. So who is that dashing redhead military man in the portrait?
That's Lieutenant Thomas Ledley Crook of the Royal Navy. He was later, after finishing active service, was given the title of Commander, which the locals changed to Commodore, and so his time at Hillsborough, he was known as the Commodore.
Yeah. And when did he come to Canada?
He came in now I've got two different numbers on this. He came either in 1834 or 1835. My understanding was 1835. I read something this morning that puts it a year earlier. And when he came, he brought one of his nephews with him, and that was Samuel Cantwell Hill, who was his sister's son. And in 1839, they were joined by his sister and his nephew, Thomas Ledley Hill. Of course, there was the keeping up with the names there. Yeah. Millward Hill, Agnes Hill, James Hill, and John Hill, and Charles Hill. So he brought a big, number, but the home he had built could sleep 19, they said. So he had room for them all.
Yeah, because he was a bachelor,
yes,
right? So
yes,
he never married, or had a family of his own. So it was great he was able to bring these relatives. Because when he built his home in Plympton Township, it was very early for Lambton County, so there weren't a lot of neighbors or other people to visit with. So great that he had some company. And what was so special about the home that he built when he arrived?
Well, when he arrived in Canada, when he got as far as Kingston, he ordered the foundation stone, which was sent up through the lakes. It was portaged to Lake Erie.
It'd be a horrible portage.
Yes, and then, but when he got it here, he hadn't seen the land yet, so he didn't know that how steep the banks were and still covered in trees and whatever. Mm-hmm. And so once the foundation layer of that big stone was laid, he changed his plans, and it was no longer a stone house, it became a brick house. Mm-hmm. And the bricks were made on the property. The exterior walls were 4 bricks thick, the interior 3 bricks. Lore about that was that if the Americans ever attacked, he was going to be safe from cannonball fire from the lake. So.
Yes, I've heard that he placed the home far back from the shore. So you think if you have property on Lake Huron, you're going to build as close to the beach as possible to get that view, but he chose to be farther back.
Yes.
In case there were ships with cannon coming his way.
And the home had the name The Moorings, but to a lot of people it was referred to as 49 because it was on lot 49. And it was supposedly a home where any visitor was welcome. Some were encouraged to stay as long as they possibly could. Mm-hmm. And a lot of that was because there was a barrel of whiskey that was right there readily accessible.
And I read that he was quite a storyteller and quite an entertainer and a very fun and engaging man that people, kind of charismatic. People love to spend time in his home.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And, yes, he had served in the War of 1812, so that was how he was able to apply for the land. Mm-hmm. But other than building his home, I think it was the fact that he brought his widowed sister and this family was his biggest contribution to the area because it became Hillsborough. Mm-hmm. And so it was, you know, it meant that there was a post office, there was a mill. A couple of the boys had stores in the community. So, and there are actually a lot of descendants of the Hills still in Lambton County.
Yeah, it's significant he brought this founding family, and you know they got their start and had such an impact on Lambton. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being with us here today.
Thank you.
So at the Forest Show and Tell, Nicole brought in a pretty awesome suitcase that had the name of an individual on it that was found in your attic, I believe. And so it had Edward Birkinshaw, the date that he arrived in Canada, which I believe was February 25th, 1948, the ship that he arrived on, and I believe, where he was from or where he came to?
Where he was arrived, and then where he was going to.
Okay. But we didn't know much else about him. So over the past week, we've been doing some digging at the archives to find out some more information on who this Edward Birkinshaw was. And so Edward Birkinshaw, after he came to Canada, which we found the passenger list from 1948, we found out from the passenger list here that he left from Liverpool, I believe, on the Empress of Canada. And he arrived mere months before purchasing the property that you now own. And so when we found out where he lived, which he was from Sheffield, which in a fun twist of events, so was your great-grandfather or grandfather?
Great-great-grandfather?
Alfred.
Alfred, yes.
Yeah, so from the same area with which her family came from. And we also found out that his wife's name was Nora, and they had a child named June. So June was 13 years old when she arrived in Canada. Nora was 34, and Edward was 42. So through the property records, we were able to figure out that they lived in the house until he passed away in 1947, and then Nora passed away a year later in 1948. So they lived, and then it was part of their estate, their property, before it moved into new hands. And we were trying to figure out who Nora was, because we saw Nora come up, and we're like, well, who is this Nora? And this is how we figured out that Nora was his wife. And so that was really neat that they called your house their home for, I would say, it was, 30 years? And before it transitioned hands in the 1970s. And from there, so we found the connection with Sheffield. There was another document that we came across talking about his profession. So there was, I forget what year this is, I think it was 1944 possibly. So Ed was a steel furnaceman or a heavy worker when he was in Sheffield, and Nora she worked at home. She did domestic duties, as they called here. When they came to Canada on the Ontario or the Canada voters list, he was listed as a laborer/molder. So he stayed kind of in the same profession when he came here to Canada. And that was really cool to figure out his profession. And we actually ended up figuring out, so we found Alfred, your great-grandparent or great-great-grandparent, and found where he lived, and we were able to see the house that he had, because it's still standing. Ed's house, unfortunately, was torn down, and it's a big parkland now, but they were like a 9-minute drive from one another, which was really kind of cool.
Yes, that was cool.
So that was a little fun find. But the weird mystery that we couldn't find for the longest time was where were they buried? Where were Ed and Nora buried? Because we couldn't find any records online. So at the archives, we went through the cemetery records and found that they're buried in, I believe, Beechwood Cemetery. Found more. Yeah, Beechwood Cemetery. So Edward was 1905 to 1977, and Nora was 1912 to 1978. So, which is that was still an active cemetery today, so they were still buried in the community nearby. And we were able to find the obituary for Ed as well. So he did pass away in the home, but he was surrounded by family and with lots of love, so that was really great to see. And yeah, so we came in. When you came in last time, we knew absolutely nothing about this gentleman in this suitcase, and we were able to uncover a pretty solid story about him after the fact and learn a little bit more, not just about Ed and Nora and their lives, but learn more about your house and also more about your family too. So that was a really cool twist.
Thank you for doing that.
Yeah, no problem. And that's our follow-up.